Hi, and welcome to this weekday word. The portion of the Psalter appointed in the morning office today is from the beginning of Psalm 119. And in verse 18 of that psalm, it says this: "Open my eyes, that I may see the wondrous things of your law." I think a lot of us track with the beginning of that verse: "Open my eyes, that I may see wondrous things." But the psalmist says, "of your law." I'll never forget an Old Testament scholar one time during a lecture saying that there are two things that continued to make the Israelites marvel: creation and the law. Creation, the marvel of all that God has made, the majesty of creation, and the way that we see God's glory and God's power and God's creativity in the world around us. And the law, that God gave us a way to know Him and to behave rightly before Him. That's part of what this psalm is getting at. If we see the law as a list of rules that we have to keep so that we don't make God mad, then we're really misunderstanding what the law is. The law, in reality, is God's character transposed into human activity. The law asks us simply to be like God, to behave like God, to do the things that God would do. And when we look at the law in that way, it means that when we look into the law, we behold wondrous things. We behold God's very character, His personality, who He is. And so even as God calls us to obey Him, He's not calling us to keep a set of rules. He's actually asking us to join in His own pattern of life. And ultimately, at the core of the law, as we heard just last week from Paul in Romans chapter 13, at the core of the law is simply this: love. Love God, love your neighbor. And if you do this, Paul says, then you are upholding the law, because love does no wrong to a neighbor. And so when we look at what God would have us do in our lives, what we find is that it's really just an expression of love. Our obedience to the law is our obedience to God out of love for God, wanting to be like God. And the way that we treat one another as we keep the law and act righteously with one another is yet another expression of love, doing no wrong to a neighbor, but instead doing whatever we can to see God's best come to fruition in their lives. So today we pray with the psalmist: open our eyes to see the wondrous things of your law. Be blessed this day, and I look forward to seeing you soon.